Destiny engine, chosen one. The heavy fog of manipulation is finally lifting, revealing the corruption that once suppressed your voice. A whole community was tricked, but they now see the truth of what this spiritual leader did to you and others as the mask of holiness falls away to expose pure malice. Every moment you felt crazy, waking up with a racing heart or sensing hostility in sacred spaces, was actually your intuition picking up on a deliberate spiritual attack aimed at containing your power. On the surface, they built something impressive, a ministry, a platform, a following of people who hung on every word. This leader spoke about love and community and serving the divine. This person held positions of trust. People confided their deepest struggles. Families donated their hard-earned money, believing it was going toward good works. But beneath that polished exterior was something rotten. This person was running a con, a sophisticated scheme that used faith as a weapon and spirituality as a cover for activities that were illegal and deeply immoral. This leader wasn't serving the divine. They focused on themselves, on ego, on greed, on the need for control and power. And when this person saw you, when they encountered your authentic spiritual gifts, they recognized you as a threat, because you represented everything this leader pretended to be but wasn't. You offered real healing while they disguised manipulation as ministry. You empowered people to trust their own connection to the divine while they kept others dependent on one interpretation of truth. You were the real thing, and that made this fraud obvious by comparison. So they launched a campaign against you, not an obvious one, nothing you could point to directly. This was spiritual warfare disguised as concern. They would gather followers and speak words like, "We need to pray for this person. Something dark is happening around them. Intercession is needed." And while it sounded caring, what was really happening was programming. The community was being conditioned to see you as broken, as dangerous, as someone who needed to be avoided for the spiritual safety of the group. They used sacred words to send curses. They used holy texts to justify character assassination. They weaponized prayer to create energetic blocks around your life, your opportunities, your connections, your success. And it worked for a while. You felt it. You experienced the heaviness, the resistance, the sense that doors were closing that should have been open. But here's what this leader didn't understand. You can't curse what the divine has blessed. Every attack they sent was being redirected. Every hex was being returned to sender. Every attempt to block you was actually making you stronger, wiser, more discerning. They intended to destroy you, but the result was refining you, preparing you for what's coming next. Inside this spiritual community, there was someone young, someone who had been raised to respect authority, to trust religious leaders without question, to believe that doubt was a sign of weak faith. But this person had something that couldn't be programmed away: intuition, the ability to read energy, true discernment. And when this young person looked at the spiritual leader, something didn't sit right. The words sounded holy, but the energy felt off. The image looked pristine, but something underneath was rotting. At first they pushed the doubts aside. Self-judgment crept in. Thoughts like, "I'm being too critical, I need to have more faith." These doubts must be attacks from dark forces trying to divide the community. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It got stronger, more insistent, like their spirit was screaming to pay attention. So they started watching, noticing, asking quiet questions to trusted people, and what they discovered was shocking. This person wasn't alone in having doubts. There were others, people who had been keeping concerns to themselves because of fear of being labeled divisive, fear of being cast out, fear of becoming the next target of community prayers. This young person started connecting dots. Money was discussed but never accounted for. Donations for missionary work never seemed to produce actual missions. Certain families were favored while others were quietly pushed to the margins. And this leader spoke about you and others like you with a tone that sounded like concern but felt like poison. Then they found something concrete, evidence of financial crimes, proof of exploitation. documentation of activities involving vulnerable people that were being hidden behind the veneer of religious authority. This wasn't just spiritual manipulation, this was actual criminal behavior, and this young person made a choice that took immense courage. They decided to become an informant. With all that trust, with all that spiritual authority they claimed to hold, because you need to understand the full scope of the corruption. They built a brand, they created a media presence, maybe a television ministry, maybe a massive social media following, maybe a physical location where hundreds of people gathered regularly. Whatever the platform, they used it to cultivate an image of being blessed, prosperous, connected to the divine in ways ordinary people weren't. And they used that image to extract resources. People gave sacrificially, believing their donations were going toward helping the poor, funding missions, supporting vulnerable communities. But the money didn't go where they promised. It went into personal accounts, into luxury items, into funding activities that would make you sick if you knew the details. If you felt called by this message, hype this video so other chosen ones like you can be reached. A partner was involved in this, someone equally complicit. Together they presented a picture of a perfect spiritual couple, a family blessed by the divine, living proof that faith produces prosperity. But behind closed doors they were running schemes. They were using networks that trafficked in things that should never be bought or sold. They were using religious authority as a cover for exploitation, and when anyone got close to figuring it out, they deployed the same tactics they used against you. They would mobilize the community to pray against that person, to see them as deceived, to avoid them for the spiritual safety of the group. It was a perfect system of control. People were trained to self-police, to shut down their own critical thinking in the name of faith and unity. But there's a problem with building empires on lies. Eventually someone notices the cracks. Someone starts asking questions that can't be easily dismissed. Someone finds evidence that can't be explained away. And once that evidence starts circulating, the whole structure collapses. You have a gift, a genuine spiritual gift. Maybe you're a healer, maybe you're a counselor, maybe you work with your hands in a way that brings comfort to people who are hurting. Maybe you're a teacher or a guide who helps people see truth beyond their blindness. Whatever your specific gift is, people feel it when they're around you. People feel safe with you. They open up. Things they've carried in silence get shared. And when that happens, something shifts. You help people see their pain from a new perspective. You help them transform trauma into power. You help them prepare for a new chapter in their lives. You don't keep people dependent. You genuinely want healing and forward movement. This spiritual leader saw that. They saw the way people gravitated toward you. They saw the transformation that happened when someone spent time in your presence. And instead of celebrating it, instead of recognizing it as something beneficial, they saw it as competition, as a threat to their control, as evidence that their claims of being special weren't true. So they planted seeds, subtle at first, comments in sermons that weren't about you specifically, but everyone knew who they meant, warnings about false teachers and deceptive practices, suggestions that people needed to be careful who they listened to, that not everyone who seemed spiritual was actually connected to the divine. Then it escalated. They brought your name up directly in prayer meetings. They asked the community to intercede for you, to pray that you would be delivered from whatever darkness they claimed was influencing you. And here's the sick part. They used sacred language to do it. They made it sound like care, like concern for your soul. But what was really happening was character assassination disguised as spiritual warfare. They painted you as dangerous, unstable, someone who might lead others astray if caution wasn't exercised. They suggested you were involved in practices that went against the faith. They questioned your motives, your character, your connection to the divine. And because this person had the platform, had the position of authority, people believed it, at least for a while. Remember that young person who began investigating. They stopped working alone. They found others who had doubts. People who had been quietly uncomfortable with the leader's behavior but didn't know what to do about it. and together they began sharing what they knew. It began with whispered conversations, questions like, "Have you noticed how they never answer direct questions about finances? Have you wondered why we never see actual results from missionary work? Do you remember when they told us to avoid that healer? What did that person actually do wrong?" These conversations spread, person to person, family to family. A network of people started seeing the cracks in the facade. And then they found hard evidence, financial records that didn't match the claims, testimony from people who had been directly harmed, documentation of activities that were clearly illegal. And once that evidence started circulating within the community, everything changed. The spell broke. People who had been defending this leader, making excuses, attacking anyone who questioned, suddenly had to face reality. They had been lied to, they had been used, someone they trusted with their spiritual well-being had manipulated them. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it, their walls are closing in. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. The backlash was swift and intense, the kind of righteous anger that comes when people realize they've been betrayed, when they understand someone claiming to speak for the divine has been exploiting them, except instead of violence, their weapons were receipts, testimony, documented proof of wrongdoing. This spiritual leader's reputation is being destroyed. Everything they built is collapsing. Their assets are being seized. Legal authorities are getting involved. And the community that once hung on every word is now spreading the truth about who this person really is. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to fight. You didn't have to expose. You didn't have to wage some kind of campaign. All you had to do was keep being authentically you, keep offering genuine healing, keep speaking truth, and that was enough. Your light, just by existing, created enough contrast that their darkness became impossible to ignore. This spiritual leader genuinely believed they held power over you. They thought their position gave them spiritual authority. They believed their ability to quote scripture meant they could manipulate spiritual forces. They held the belief that they could hex you through prayers, that they could bind your success, that they could make you invisible to opportunities and connections meant for you, and they made attempts. They sent attacks toward your dreams, toward your sleep, trying to invade your mind with oppressive energy, trying to plant thoughts that would make you doubt yourself. They performed rituals disguised as prayer meetings, speaking your name while directing negative intention your way. They attempted to create energetic blocks around your business, your relationships, your finances. When you're truly aligned with divine purpose, you have protection beyond their comprehension. Angels are watching over you. Spiritual forces have been assigned to your journey. You have a connection to Source that supersedes any attack a fraud in religious clothing could ever send. Every curse they spoke was being redirected back to them. Every hex was being returned multiplied. Every attempt to block you was actually being transmuted into fuel for your growth. You felt the weight of it, yes. You experienced periods of heaviness and doubt. But you survived, you came through, and in the process you got stronger, because this is how spiritual law works. You can't curse what the divine has blessed, you can't block what the universe has ordained. You can't stop someone who is genuinely walking in their purpose, no matter how much religious language you use to try. And this spiritual leader is about to experience the full weight of every bit of negativity they tried to send your way, not because you wished it on them, not because you cast anything back, but because what you send out always returns, and they sent out a lot. People in positions of legal authority are building cases against this spiritual leader, law enforcement, financial investigators, people who specialize in uncovering fraud and exploitation, and some of these investigators have been led to your content, to the things you've been saying publicly about spiritual manipulation, about discernment, about recognizing false teachers and toxic religious systems. They're not looking at you as a suspect, they're seeing you as someone who has insight they need. You see, investigators are good at following money trails and documenting crimes, but they don't always understand the spiritual dynamics of how these manipulations work, how someone can use religious language to control people, how prayer can be weaponized, how a community can be programmed to attack anyone who questions the leader. But you understand those dynamics, you've lived them, you've been targeted by them, and your ability to articulate what's happening from a spiritual perspective is valuable. It helps them see patterns they might otherwise miss. It gives them language to describe behaviors that seem bizarre from an outside perspective, but make perfect sense when the spiritual manipulation is understood. So you might be contacted. Someone official might reach out, asking if you would be willing to share your observations, to provide context, to help them understand the full scope of what this leader was doing. Don't be afraid if that happens. This isn't about you being in trouble. This is about your voice becoming part of the exposure of corruption. The irony is almost poetic. This leader tried so hard to discredit you, to make sure no one would listen to you, to paint you as unstable and dangerous. And now your words, your insights, your ability to see through spiritual deception is exactly what's helping to bring their entire operation down. This spiritual leader didn't just steal money, though they did plenty of that. They didn't just exploit trust, though that was certainly part of it. What they stole was far more valuable and far harder to recover. They stole people's ability to trust their own discernment. Every time someone in that community had a gut feeling that something was off, every time their intuition whispered that the math didn't add up or the explanation didn't make sense, they were trained to override it. To see those doubts as attacks from dark forces, to believe that questioning leadership was the same as questioning the divine. That's spiritual abuse. That's how you keep people trapped. You convince them that their own inner knowing, their own connection to truth, their own direct line to the divine is less reliable than your interpretation. You make them dependent on you to tell them what's real and what's not, what's holy and what's dangerous, who to trust and who to avoid. And when people asked about you, when they wondered why you were being painted as someone to pray against rather than learn from, their questions were met with sophisticated deflection. Oh, you're so compassionate, that's beautiful, but you don't see the full picture. Trust me, things are happening behind the scenes that would shock you. I can't share the details, but please just trust that we're protecting the community. People believed that because they wanted to believe their leader had information they didn't, that their leader was privy to spiritual insights they couldn't access, that their leader was operating from a higher level of wisdom and discernment, but there were no details, there was no behind-the-scenes information, there was only a person trying to eliminate competition, trying to make sure no one in their community discovered that authentic spiritual guidance existed outside their control. Now the community is realizing they were lied to. They're understanding that every time they were told to pray against you, they were actually being programmed, conditioned, turned into soldiers in a war they didn't know they were fighting, a war that had nothing to do with spirituality and everything to do with one person's need to maintain power and control. The grief in that community right now is real. People are mourning the version of reality they thought they lived in. They're mourning the leader they thought they knew. They're mourning the time and resources and faith they invested in something that turned out to be rotten at its core. But grief is part of the healing process, and healing is what's happening now. You need to know what's happening in private group chats right now, in phone calls between people who used to defend this spiritual leader without question, in living rooms where families are gathered trying to make sense of what they've learned. They're talking about you, but not the way they used to, not with suspicion or concern or that patronizing tone of "we need to pray for them." No, they're talking about you with clarity, with regret, with dawning realization of what actually happened. Someone is sitting at their kitchen table right now saying, "I can't believe we were told to stay away from them. I looked at their work. There's nothing wrong with what they're doing. In fact, it's exactly what we needed and couldn't get from our leader." Another person is scrolling through your content, reading words you wrote, and feeling those words cut through confusion like a knife through butter. They're remembering moments now, moments when this spiritual leader would bring up your name with that subtle edge in their voice. Moments when the community was subtly directed to question your motives, your character, your connection to the divine. And they're seeing those moments for what they really were: calculated manipulation, strategic discrediting, a campaign to neutralize a threat before you could be recognized as an alternative. Some of them feel sick with guilt. They participated in this, they repeated the lies, they warned others to be careful around you. They might have even confronted you directly, armed with nothing but hearsay and the misplaced trust they had in their leader. And now they're seeing how they were used as weapons against someone who was only ever trying to help. Others feel angry, furious that they were played, that their genuine desire to protect their community was twisted and redirected toward an innocent person, that their prayers, their spiritual practices, their faith itself was weaponized without their consent or knowledge. But here's what matters most: they're waking up. And when people wake up from deception, they don't just see the truth about one thing, they start questioning everything. Every teaching they accepted without examination, every financial request they fulfilled without transparency, every time they silenced their own doubts because questioning felt like betraying their faith. This community is going through a collective reckoning, and your name keeps coming up, not as the villain they were taught to see, but as the person who was right all along, the person who saw through the facade when they were still blind to it. The person who kept their integrity when compromise would have been easier. There were people in that community who never fully bought the narrative about you. People whose intuition kept whispering that something didn't add up. People who couldn't shake the feeling that condemning someone they'd never met, based solely on their leader's word, didn't sit right. These people thought they were alone. They kept their doubts quiet. They didn't want to be the next target. They didn't want to be labeled as the one causing division or being deceived, so they stayed silent in public while questions churned in private. But gradually, carefully, they started testing the waters with people they trusted. A comment here, a question there. And when they found someone else with similar doubts, something shifted. They realized they weren't crazy. They weren't being deceived by dark forces. They were picking up on reality. These small groups formed, 2 people becoming 3, 3 becoming 5. They started sharing observations, comparing notes, noticing patterns they couldn't see when they were isolated. One person would say, "I've been tracking the financial reports and the numbers don't match what we're told." Another would add, "I tried to verify that missionary work and I can't find any evidence it actually exists." They became investigators without meaning to. They weren't trying to take down their leader. They were trying to understand truth. They were trying to reconcile what they were being told with what they could actually observe. And the more they looked, the less things made sense. This is how movements start, not with loud declarations, but with quiet truth-seeking, not with public confrontations, but with private honesty, not with one hero, but with a network of people who decided truth mattered more than comfort. And you need to know that some of these people were defending you before they ever met you, before they ever encountered your work directly. They were defending you simply because the attacks against you felt wrong. The energy behind the warnings felt contaminated. The insistence that everyone avoid you without clear evidence of harm felt like manipulation rather than protection. They were right. Their instincts were correct, their discernment was functioning properly, and now that everything is coming to light, they're being proven right in ways they couldn't have fully imagined. These are your allies. Even though they were part of a community that was turned against you, they never fully turned. You're going to notice shifts immediately. Connections that went cold are warming up again. People who stopped responding to your messages are suddenly reaching back out. Opportunities that fell through for no clear reason are being presented again with better terms. Resources that seem to dry up are flowing back. This isn't coincidence. This is what happens when energetic blocks get removed. When someone who was using spiritual warfare to interfere with your path gets their power stripped away. When the universe can finally move things into alignment without interference, some of these opportunities are going to seem too good to be true. You're going to wonder if you're worthy, if you deserve this level of blessing, if maybe it's a trick or a test. Let me be clear, you are worthy, you do deserve this, and it's not a trick. This is what your life looks like when manipulation isn't blocking your blessings. Your work is about to reach people on a scale you haven't experienced before, because here's what happens when a false teacher falls. Their followers don't just walk away from spirituality altogether. Most of them start looking for the real thing. They start seeking out authentic teachers, genuine healers, people who actually walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. And guess where many of them are going to end up? Following the breadcrumbs that the investigators left behind, looking into the very people their former leader told them to avoid, discovering that the warnings they received were actually recommendations in disguise. Your platform is about to grow. Your influence is about to expand. Not because you chased it or manipulated anyone into following you, but because you stayed true to your purpose, even when it was hard, even when you were under attack, even when it would have been easier to compromise or quit. Some of you are going to receive financial blessings that seem to come out of nowhere, contracts you didn't even know you were being considered for, opportunities that pay better than anything you've done before, resources that allow you to expand your healing work in ways you've been dreaming about but couldn't quite make happen. This isn't random, this is divine redistribution. The wealth that was being hoarded and misused by corrupt spiritual leaders is being transferred to those who will actually use it for good. The influence that was being wielded by manipulators is being given to authentic servants. But here's what you need to understand about receiving this abundance. It comes with responsibility. You're not being blessed so you can hoard wealth the way this corrupt leader did. You're being blessed so you can do the work you were called to do without the burden of financial stress, so you can help more people, so you can create systems and structures that serve rather than exploit. The money coming your way is seed money for a movement, for a new way of doing spiritual community that's based on transparency, accountability, mutual respect and genuine empowerment, rather than manipulation and control. You're being trusted with resources because the divine knows you won't abuse that trust. Some of you are going to feel uncomfortable with this level of prosperity. You're going to have old programming that says spiritual people should be poor, that wealth is ungodly, that abundance means you've compromised. Let me break that programming right now. Poverty doesn't make you holy. Struggle doesn't make you pure. You can be deeply spiritual and financially abundant at the same time. In fact, you need to be, because the work you're being called to do requires resources. It requires stability. It requires you to not be constantly worried about how you're going to pay your bills, so you can focus on the healing and teaching and building you're meant to do. But I need to warn you about something. As all of this unfolds, as you watch this spiritual leader fall, as you see justice manifest, there's going to be a temptation to let this experience turn you bitter, to let what they did to you make you cynical about spiritual community altogether. Don't do it. Don't let the actions of a corrupt fraud steal your faith in the possibility of genuine sacred connection. Don't let one bad experience close you off to the beauty of authentic spiritual collaboration, because that's what the enemy wants. The enemy wants you isolated, alone, convinced that you can't trust anyone. You went through this for a reason. You experience this level of spiritual warfare because you're being prepared for something bigger, something that requires you to have first-hand knowledge of how manipulation works. You can't effectively help people trapped in toxic systems if you've never been targeted yourself. You can't guide someone out of deception if you don't understand how seductive it can be. This trial made you wiser. It taught you to recognize red flags. It showed you the difference between genuine spiritual authority and the counterfeit version. It gave you compassion for people who get caught up in these systems because you understand how sophisticated the manipulation can be. And now you get to use that wisdom. Not by becoming some kind of professional whistleblower, not by making it your mission to expose every false teacher you encounter, but by being so genuinely authentic, so clearly aligned with truth, that people who encounter you immediately recognize the difference, by creating spaces that are so psychologically and spiritually safe that people who have been traumatized by toxic spiritual leadership can heal in your presence, by modeling what it looks like to have healthy boundaries and genuine compassion at the same time, by showing people that yes, there are frauds in religious clothing, but there are also real servants doing real work. This is your new assignment. This is why you survived. This is why you're being shown the fall of this leader in real time, so you can witness that justice is real, that manipulation doesn't win in the end, that light truly does overcome darkness, and so you can carry that certainty forward as you step into this next phase of your purpose. What's happening with this one spiritual leader and this one community is not isolated. This exposure is sending shockwaves through networks of similar organizations. Other corrupt leaders are watching and panicking, because if it could happen there, it could happen to them. Right now there are people in other communities who've been having similar doubts, who've been noticing similar patterns, who've been feeling the same spiritual unease about their leaders. And when they hear about this exposure, when they see that investigation is possible, that accountability can happen, that survivors can be believed, it gives them hope. It gives them courage. You're going to start seeing more exposures, more communities waking up, more corrupt leaders falling, because this moment is part of a larger shift. The divine is cleaning house. All the places where spiritual authority was abused, where sacred things were used for profane purposes, where the vulnerable were exploited in the name of faith, it's all being brought to light. And you're part of the catalyst for that larger awakening. The spiritual warfare you endured, the attacks you survived, the truth you continued to speak even when you were being slandered, it all mattered. Not just for you, not just for this one community, but for everyone who needs to see that fake spiritual authority can be challenged and overcome. Other healers who've been targeted are watching what's happening to you. They're seeing that the attacks didn't destroy you. They're seeing that truth eventually prevails. They're seeing that the divine does vindicate those who are genuinely doing the work. And it's giving them strength to keep going, to not give up even when the opposition feels overwhelming. You have no idea how many people you've encouraged just by surviving. How many people are looking at your journey and finding hope for their own. How many people needed to see someone make it through spiritual warfare intact so they could believe they might make it through too. This is bigger than you realize. The fall of this one leader is exposing fault lines in an entire system. It's making people question other leaders, other teachings, other structures they've accepted without examination. It's creating space for genuine spiritual community to emerge, for authentic teachers to be recognized, for real healing to happen. Chosen one, you need to understand something about the timing of all this. None of this is random. Every piece of this puzzle, from the young person who started investigating, to the evidence coming to light, to you seeing this right now, all of it is orchestrated. You're being shown this for a reason. This information is being given to you at this exact moment because you need to know you're not alone, that the things you've been sensing are real, that the spiritual warfare you've been under is ending, that vindication is manifesting right now. But more than that, you're being reminded of who you are. You're a chosen one, someone who was selected before birth to carry light in dark places, to speak truth when lies are popular, to heal what others have broken, to build what others have destroyed. This spiritual leader, this corrupt system, this whole situation, it's not the main story, it's a chapter, something you had to move through to get where you're going. The main story is you, your evolution, your purpose, the lives you're going to touch, the healing you're going to facilitate, the truth you're going to speak. Don't let what someone else did to you become the defining narrative of your life. They're falling, you're rising. That's the story. That's what matters. And as you rise, remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to be under attack and survive. Remember what it felt like to be lied about and know your truth anyway. Remember what it felt like to keep going when everything in you wanted to quit, because people are coming behind you who need to hear that story, who need to know it's possible to make it through, who need your light to find their way out of their own darkness. You survived for yourself, yes, but also for them, for everyone who will be healed by your healing, for everyone who will be freed by your freedom. And whether you ever know the full extent of your impact or not, whether you ever see all the lives that are touched by your refusal to quit, you need to know this. The divine is using your testimony. Your survival is speaking. Your vindication is proving something that people desperately need to believe, that light really does overcome darkness, that truth really does prevail, that authentic spiritual service really is more powerful than manipulation. You have spiritual forces backing you that make any opposition look like children playing dress-up. You have protection in realms you can't see. You have a team working on your behalf that has been orchestrating this entire exposure, and they're not going anywhere. The whole community was tricked, but they're waking up. They're seeing the truth, and that truth includes seeing you clearly for the first time, seeing your light, seeing your authenticity, seeing your power, and they won't be able to unsee it. Neither will you. This is your time, chosen one. Take it.